The replay monitor does not lie. And what the umpire saw on that screen tonight, every frame, every angle, every deliberately calculated moment of contact, left absolutely no room for debate, no space for alternative interpretation, and no possibility of a conclusion other than the one that was announced to a stadium that fell so completely silent you could hear the sound of the crew chief's footsteps as he walked back onto that field to deliver his verdict. The Mets catcher and pitcher have been severely penalized. Juan Soto and Bichette, two of the most recognizable names in the sport today, did something on that field in the moments that followed that witnesses are still struggling to find adequate words to describe. And Shohei Ohtani, the most composed and dignified player in professional baseball, has spoken out with a strength and a directness that has sent a shockwave through every corner of this sport. The truth behind what the Mets were doing has now been fully revealed. And it is worse than anyone suspected. To understand the full gravity of tonight's events, you have to understand what was happening long before the replay review was called. According to multiple inside sources with direct knowledge of the situation, the pattern of behavior that the umpire's monitor ultimately exposed did not begin during this game. It had been developing across multiple recent matchups, carefully, deliberately, and with a consistency that several veteran players had already begun to notice and discuss quietly among themselves in the days leading up to tonight. According to those sources, the Dodgers coaching staff had been tracking a specific pattern in the way the Mets battery was operating against Ohtani. Not the pitching strategy. Not the pitch selection or the sequencing or any of the conventional tactical decisions that opposing batteries make against elite hitters. Something else. Something physical. Something that existed in the space between what the rules technically prohibit and what competitive baseball routinely tolerates, and that had been gradually, systematically pushed further and further toward a line that everyone involved understood existed even when nobody said it out loud. According to multiple eyewitnesses on the field tonight, that line was crossed before the third inning had concluded. And when it was crossed clearly enough that the umpiring crew had no realistic option other than the one they chose. The call for a replay review came from the crew chief personally. According to multiple sources present at the stadium, the decision was made without consultation, without hesitation, and with a directness that immediately communicated to everyone on the field that this was not a standard review of a close play. Players on both sides recognized the difference instantly. Coaches in both dugouts moved to the front of the steps. The crowd, which had been generating the kind of noise that fills a stadium during a genuinely competitive game, began to quiet in the way that crowds quiet when they sense that something significant is being decided rather than simply reviewed. What the monitor showed, according to multiple sources familiar with the footage examined during the review, was everything the umpiring crew needed and nothing that gave the Mets representatives any credible basis for dispute. The contact was not accidental. The positioning of both the catcher and the pitcher in the sequence of moments leading up to the incident was not the product of routine baseball movement or competitive instinct operating within acceptable boundaries. It was calculated. Purposeful. Directed specifically and repeatedly at one player. Shohei Ohtani. When the crew chief emerged from the review and the penalties were announced, the Mets dugout erupted. Not in the measured, professional manner of a team that disagreed with a ruling but understood the process. In something rawer than that. Something that immediately escalated the situation from serious to genuinely dangerous. Juan Soto moved first. According to multiple inside sources with direct knowledge of the sequence of events, Soto came out of the dugout with an intensity that alarmed players on both sides of the field before he had taken more than a few steps. The argument he directed at the umpiring crew was loud, sustained, and crossed the boundary between competitive protest and conduct that the crew chief was not prepared to tolerate given everything that had already occurred during this game. According to multiple eyewitnesses, Soto's protest escalated through several stages, each one more serious than the last, each one pushing further past the point where a veteran player of his experience should have understood he needed to stop. The warnings were clear. The umpires were explicit. And Soto, according to those present, gave every indication of hearing those warnings and choosing to disregard them entirely. Bichette arrived seconds later. And what Bichette did in the moments that followed is what has left the baseball world completely speechless tonight. According to multiple sources present on the field, Bichette's entry into the confrontation began as a continuation of Soto's protest, loud, physical in its energy, and clearly designed to challenge the authority of the umpiring crew's decision with maximum force. Players nearby began moving instinctively, some to intervene, some simply reacting to the electricity of a situation that was deteriorating faster than anyone could effectively manage. And then Bichette threw his helmet. Not toward the ground. Not in a direction that could be interpreted as anything other than what it was. According to multiple eyewitnesses, Bichette threw his helmet directly and deliberately toward Shohei Ohtani. The moment it left his hand, the stadium transformed. The noise that followed was not the noise of a crowd reacting to a baseball play. It was the noise of thousands of people simultaneously comprehending that what they had just witnessed had crossed a boundary so absolute and so fundamental that the normal framework of how a baseball crowd processes events simply did not apply. Players on both sides froze. According to multiple sources, even Soto, who had been in the middle of his own escalating confrontation with the umpiring crew, stopped when Bichette's helmet left his hand. The moment created a stillness on that field that those present described as one of the most unsettling things they had ever experienced during a professional baseball game. Because in that stillness, everyone on the field was processing the same reality simultaneously. This had gone somewhere that none of them had ever been before. The umpiring crew's response was immediate and absolute. Both Soto and Bichette were ejected with a speed and a finality that required no discussion and permitted no appeal. According to multiple sources, the crew chief's ejection of Bichette was delivered with language so direct and so serious that players standing nearby instinctively stepped back. This was not the standard vocabulary of an on-field ejection. This was something different. Something that reflected the full institutional weight of what the umpiring crew had just witnessed. According to those sources, MLB's office was notified of the helmet incident before Bichette had reached the tunnel. The league's response, according to multiple sources familiar with the initial internal communications, treated the helmet throw not as an extension of the original controversy but as a separate act of misconduct, one whose consequences would be determined independently and with a seriousness that reflected exactly what the footage showed. The truth behind the Mets' approach to Ohtani, the full picture of what had been planned, discussed, and deliberately executed across multiple games, began to emerge in the hours following the final out. According to multiple sources with knowledge of internal communications within the Mets organization, the physical approach to Ohtani that the replay review exposed was not improvised by the battery in the heat of competition. It had been discussed. According to those sources, multiple people within the organization had awareness of the strategy before this game began, awareness that the league will now treat as directly relevant to the severity of the consequences being prepared. That revelation transforms the nature of everything that happened tonight. The penalties handed to the catcher and pitcher are no longer simply a matter of in-game misconduct that escalated beyond what anyone intended. They are the documented conclusion of a deliberate strategy directed at the most prominent player in professional baseball, a strategy that was known, discussed, and executed with a premeditation that MLB's office will not treat lightly under any circumstances. According to multiple sources familiar with the league's initial response to the full picture of evidence now available, the consequences being prepared go significantly beyond what the umpiring crew had the authority to administer on the field tonight. The catcher, the pitcher, Soto, and Bichette are all facing disciplinary actions whose severity reflects not just what happened during this game but the full context of what the investigation has revealed about how it was planned. Ohtani spoke after the game. Not through a representative. Not in the measured, carefully constructed language of an official statement. He stood in front of the media and he spoke with a directness and a strength that those who cover him regularly described as unlike anything they had heard from him before. He said he had known what was happening. He said the pattern had been visible to him long before the umpires called for the review. He said that what was done to him tonight was not a competitive act, it was a deliberate one. And he said that he expected the league to respond in a manner that reflected the full seriousness of what the evidence had revealed. And then he said something that silenced every reporter in that room. He said that what concerned him most was not what had been done to him specifically. What concerned him was what it said about the respect, or the absence of it, that existed within this sport for the standards that made professional baseball worth playing at all. For a player who has always let his performance speak loudest, those words carried a weight that statistics never could. Because Ohtani was not speaking as a victim tonight. He was speaking as someone who understood that what happened to him was bigger than one game, one team, or one set of penalties. The Mets are facing consequences they cannot escape. Soto and Bichette have done something the sport will not forget. And Ohtani has reminded everyone watching why this sport still has a conscience. The baseball world is watching. And after tonight, nothing will look the same. Thank you for watching. If Ohtani's powerful words and Bichette's shocking moment left you speechless, drop your reaction in the comments right now. And if you want every major MLB story before anyone else covers it, subscribe to the channel immediately. More is coming, and you cannot afford to miss it.